Hey, this is Mr. Ward, and this is the pre-algebra exit ticket 26.1, and this is your video answer key. So the mass of a red blood cell is 27 picometers, which comes out to 2.7 times 10 to the negative 14th kilograms. Now, in the do now, we worked out that there were about 1.48 times 10 to the 13th red blood cells in an 80-pound child's body. What would the mass of all those red blood cells be? Okay, so that is multiplication. So we're going to take one red blood cell's mass and multiply it times all of those red blood cells. So that's 2.7 times 10 to the 14th. You confirm that I wrote that down right? Yes, 10, I'm sorry, to the negative 14th. Silly me. Negative numbers matter. Okay, and then we're going to have times 1.48 times 10 to the 13th power. I'm going to group the coefficients and group the powers. 2.7 times 1.48. Now, 2.7 is almost 3, and 1.48 is almost 1.5. So we're going to be somewhere in the range between 4 and 4.5. I'm going to guess about 4.2 or 4.3 on this. That's my estimate on that. So let's go ahead and get that. Well, a little high, 3.996. Okay, so that comes out to 3.996. And then our power is going to be 10 to the negative 14th plus 13th, which is going to end up being 10 to the negative first. And that's kilograms, of course. So we're already in scientific notation because our coefficient is good to go. 3.996 times 10 to the negative first kilograms, or approximately 4/10 of a kilogram. That would be approximately 4/10 of a kilogram. Now, let's simplify this expression. I've got x's and I've got y's. So let's deal with the x's over here, and we'll deal with the y's over there. So x here, I've got an x to the negative third to the fourth, so that's going to be to the negative third times 4. And then over here, times x to the third. So I'm going to be adding that, because between here, this is the product law. Within here, it's the power law. So I deal with the power law, negative 3 times 4, and then the product law, plus 3. And then over here, I've got y to the, and I'll say negative 5 times 4, and then plus negative 4. Okay, so let's put all that together. So I've got x is now going to be to the negative 12 plus 3, parentheses, so I know I've got a grouping of exponentialness powers there. I've got y to the negative 20 plus negative 4 is just minus 4. So let's work that out. That's going to be x to the negative 9th, and that's going to be y to the negative 24th. All right. Generally, when we work this sort of thing out, we do not want any negative exponents in the final simplified version. So I'm going to move both of those. This is x to the negative 9th over 1, and that's y to the negative 24th over 1. I'm going to move them across the fraction bar. I'm going to flip those fractions. So I'm going to make it 1 over x to the, now that I've moved across the fraction bar, the sign of my power changes to positive, and then y to the positive 24th. I'm going to put those in parentheses and give a little space there to indicate that those are separate expressions in that denominator. I'll go ahead and put that. I don't actually formally need it, but there it is. So I've got 1 over x to the 9th times y to the 24th. Now we got some optional challenge problems, and I'll go ahead and work this out. So down here, I've got a 2. So I'm going to deal with the 2 separately from the variables. So I'm going to deal with that first. I'm going to 2. I've got x, and then I've got y. So let's deal with the 2. So that's going to be just 2 to the, that's 2 to the first And then down here, that's 2 to the negative 3. So that's going to be minus negative 3. I'll put that all in parentheses so I know what I'm dealing with there. Now let's deal with the x's. So up here, I've got x to the fourth and x to the third. So that's going to be x to the 4 plus negative 3. And then down here, I'll say minus, like that, and then minus. Let's see, we got x to the second, it's x to the negative first, all to the negative third. So that's going to be negative 3 times 2 plus negative 1. Okay, and I'm subtracting that because those are the exponents in the denominator. Now I'm going to deal with y. In the numerator, I've got a 2, and that's to the first. So that's going to be to the 2 plus 1. I'll put that in parentheses. And I'm going to be subtracting what's in the denominator. And I'll put that in parentheses. That's going to be y to the second times y to the first to the negative third. So I'm going to say negative 3 here. And then I'm going to say 2 plus 1 in here. Okay, so let's start simplifying that. That's going to be 2 to the 1 minus negative 3 is going to be 2 to the second power. That'll end up being a 4 if we want to. This is going to be x to the, okay, 4 plus negative 3 is going to be 1. And then I've got minus negative 3 times 2 plus negative 1. So that's going to be just 1. And then I'll deal with that in a little bit, finish dealing with that. Actually, I'll just go and say 4. I'll deal with that, and I'll come back up to the y. So I've got x to the 1 minus negative 3, basically. So 1 minus negative 3 is 2. And I'm done with the x's, and now let's deal with the y's. So I've got y to the 2 plus 1, that's 3. I'll put that in parentheses. Minus, I've got negative 3 times 3. And I'll go ahead and finish that now. That's going to end up being y to the 3 minus negative 9. Okay, and that's going to end up being just y to the 12th. Okay, so now I've got all that together. I've got 4x squared y to the 12th. I'll give it a little space. And that's our answer. 4 times x squared times y to the 12th. If you said 2 squared for 4, that's fine as well. Okay, and now let's deal with this one here. I've got some 2's, I've got an x's, some x's, and I've got some y's again. I'll deal with the numbers, the x's, and the y's. So the 2 in the numerator is to the first, but it's being raised to the second. And in the denominator, it's also being raised to the second. Okay, so that means it's going to get canceled out, but I'll show that. So that's 2 to the first to the second over 2 to the first to the second. So that's going to be just 2 to the 2 minus 2. And then the x's here, I've got everything's going to be doubled. So I've got x to the negative 3 and x to the 0. So that's going to be 2 the 2 times negative 3 plus 0, which won't matter, minus 2 to the 2 times 1. Okay, so that'll all be pretty easy to deal with. Then I've got y to the first, I've got y to the third, and that's being raised to the second in the numerator, so I'll deal with that. So I'm going to raise it. So 2 for the to the second times 1 plus 3. And I'm going to subtract 2 times 3 for the denominator. So 2 to the 2 minus 2 is going to be 2 to the 0, or just 1, which we won't care about since it's all multiplication. And we don't care about multiplication times 1. Then we'll say x to the 2 times negative 3 minus 2, and I'll keep going with that. That's going to be x to the negative 6th minus 2. I'll keep going. That's going to be just x to the negative 8, which ends up being 1 over x to the 8th, if we don't want to have any negatives in our exponents. Let's deal with the y's. It's going to be y to the 2 times 4 minus 2 times 3, which will be 6. And now I'm going to go down here. I'll start simplifying that some further. 2 to the 2 times 4 is the 8th. 8th minus 6th. And then one more step, y to the 2nd. Okay, so I've got y to the 2nd. I've got 1 over x to the 8th, and I've got a 1, which I don't care about. So I'm just going to call this y to the 2nd over x to the 8th, and I am done with that calculation. There you go. That's the answer. I hope that helps.